So to continue the journey up the stack today, we now move into the CDN propositions part of the day. And we're going to be here through the afternoon looking at all of the different things that different CDNs offer to the market and how they're going about offering those things, and also how the market and the technologies are evolving. I thought it was appropriate, given that video is about 80% of all internet traffic. Estimates vary, but given it's about 80% of all video traffic, and CDS is part of streaming media, which is obviously very video centric, I think it's highly appropriate to ask JT to join us from the Streaming Video Alliance and give us an update on all the activities that the Streaming Video Alliance is undertaking that relate to CDNs. So I think in my rush to go and find some ice, I'm going to hand over to JT and ask him to talk to you about the SVA. JT, over to you, sir.
So yeah, let's jump into this. Everybody, let me share my screen with you. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do, as Dom just told you, is I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of, who the Streaming Video Alliance is, what kind of organization are we and what we're trying to accomplish. And then we'll jump into what our activities are around CDN. So we have a number of working groups that are actively engaged on projects that are related to CDN or dealing with CDN technical challenges. And so I'll go through those, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about sort of where we might be focusing next as an organization, and that will lead us into the panel that comes right after. So let's get started. All right, a little bit about the Alliance. So our mission, we've got basically three really simple missions. The first is that we want to educate the industry. So we want to make sure that we're all aware of what the challenges are, the technical challenges related to streaming video, high quality streaming video at scale. A lot of times we talk about them differently. Sometimes they're really unknown because, for example, streaming platforms may have solved those problems themselves and not really communicated it. So we're trying to provide that forum for education so that we're all aware of what the challenges are. The second mission we have is really collaboration, right? So people working together. We provide a forum for everybody in the ecosystem, so network operators and service providers and content rights holders and technology companies to come together in kind of a safe place and really work with each other to, again, address those challenges. And the last mission we have is really defining solutions to the challenges. So we want to make sure that not only do we bring people together to work on these issues that we're all agreeing are issues, but that we can produce something meaningful for the industry to use. So that might be a specification or best practices or guidelines or even code that will allow the industry to take that and use it to solve that problem that they have, without trying to reinvent the wheel. So again, very simple mission, very simple objectives, but that's kind of what we are as an organization. In terms of just some data points, so we've been around for about five and a half years. We have over 80 member companies that are actually participating, and I'll kind of touch on those in a little bit. We have published, I think at this point, 16 documents since our inception. So obviously those first couple of years are, you're trying to figure everything out, and then things start to steamroll. We've got, just this year, we've already published 2 documents, and we have 4 or 5 more on the docket. Some will bleed into next year, but we'll be increasing the number of published documents quite a bit over the next 12 months. Technical groups, we have over 10 technical groups, and I'll show you in a second, they address a lot of different problems. Great growth, and we have face-to-face meetings as well as bi-weekly calls every month. Our board of directors, it's kind of like a who's who in some of the stream parts. We've got Disney on there, Comcast, and operators like Optus and Lumen and Verizon, and even technology companies like Quilt and Sky, and Adobe. So we've got a lot of representation on our board of directors, sort of helping drive what the Alliance is trying to do. We are a global organization, so we pretty much span everywhere. We have representation from, really from all the major points, and I actually need to put a little dot down here in Australia, but Optus joined, last year, and so they've been starting to contribute as well. We don't have a ton of representation from the sort of Asia-Pac region, and that's simply because of time zone issues, right? It's very hard for companies to participate in our working group calls, which usually happen pretty early in the morning Pacific time for a lot of our European members, but it's still like 2 a.m. In Japan. And so it becomes a difficulty in hosting those folks, but they do try to find ways to participate. And really quickly, it's just like this, a snapshot of all of our members. You can kind of see a lot of logos on there. Some of them are very big companies, some are very small companies, some are technology providers, some are content rights holders, some are CDNs, some are network operators. It's just a huge smattering of participation from across the streaming video ecosystem. And you can see all of these on our website. You can just go there and check them out if you want to look at them later. We also have some participating brands. So these are brands that our other member companies have acquired over the years. So, for example, Disney, when they purchased the Fox assets, they ended up having a controlling interest in Hulu. And so, Hulu is now a participant of the Streaming Video Alliance. Our bylaws allow parent companies to bring any of their subsidiaries or other brands to participate as well without having to pay additional members fees. So you can see folks here from like Pluto and Paramount and Peacock, they're all starting to participate underneath their parent brands. Now, we also do have a lot of alliances and partnerships. Organizations don't solve problems on their own. So we work with lots of other organizations to make sure that we don't cross wires, make sure that we're all, again, aligning on the same objectives. And I'll talk about one of those specifically closer to the end of the presentation, but you can see here that we work with CTA and Dash and IAB Tech Labs and SRT and Movie Labs. We try to involve them in our work as much as possible, and sometimes they will even send people to participate. So again, the whole goal is to create sort of a, kind of a mesh of all of us working for one common objective, which is higher quality video at scale. Now, back to the sort of technical groups I said I would mention. These are all of our technical groups right now. Again, you can catch these on our website, but the gist is we cover the gamut, really, of what's happening with the streaming video workflow. So everything from advertising down to playback, everything in between there, like measurement and QoE and geo and networking and transport. The gist is that we want to make sure that we're trying to address, again, those technical challenges, or even identifying those technical challenges across the video workflow, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest problems is we just don't have a catalog of what the real issues are. And so that's, again, back to one of our first objectives. That's what we're trying to do in a lot of these working groups that then leads to bigger projects like specifications or lab testing or recommendations or things like that. Now, sort of thinking about sort of what are the key CDN challenges, right? As an organization, our working groups are constantly asking this question, right? What should we be working on? Now, we are a bottom-up organization, so our board does not say, okay, you working group are going to work on this. It's up to the working group chairs to ferret out those projects from their participants. So it's really hand raising, right? So if you're in a working group, you raise your hand, say, hey, I have a problem with this, and that becomes a discussion. And sooner or later, you know that 80% of the group is raising their hands as well, and that then becomes a project. So these are some of the topics that some of our working groups will probably start to zero in on, right? So scaling, how do you scale the CDN effectively across different geographies while maintaining things like security? How do you employ the edge better, right? So what role does the edge play in streaming video? What role can it play? And again, how do you scale that? How do you do that efficiently and effectively? Resiliency, right? So obviously, as the demand for streaming grows at scale, there are going to be issues with maintaining the network resiliency across mobile and fixed and wireless. And so that becomes an issue for the CDN. How do we deliver to all these things and make sure that the signal is the same, make sure that it's a great experience even as we grow? Latency, right? I think everyone knows about latency. That's probably one of the hottest topics right now for CDNs, especially as live sports kicks into gear and we don't really have physical fan attendance. More people are watching online. And so we have to make sure that there isn't that latency with the, between the stream and the live broadcast, or even with the stream itself. And then you've got consistency, right? The worst thing we could do is have 50 bitrate changes during a stream, right? That's awful. And so CDNs are trying to figure out how do we solve this problem of maintaining sort of this consistency across a stream during peak traffic times, right? When all of a sudden everyone jumps on, how do we make sure that there's a great level set of quality that's appropriate for the individual devices people are using and the bandwidth that they have. And then lastly is interoperability, right? We know that contents right holders, they're all starting to use multiple CDNs. How do we ensure that these CDNs work together? How do the CDNs ensure that they can interoperate with other CDNs so that the content right holder or the streaming platform operator, it's easier for them to manage delivery across multiple networks? So these are some of the issues, the technical challenges that we see that our groups are starting to explore. Now, thinking about sort of CDN technologies within the Streaming Video Alliance, and back to this technical working group slide, I've highlighted those 4 groups where we're really seeing a lot of effort put into tackling some of those challenges. So obviously we've got networking and transport and open caching, right? They deal with the network itself, and open caching I'm going to talk a lot about in a little bit. And then you've got certain things like live streaming work group, right? So they have just finished up a document around best practices for reducing live stream latency. So obviously that has applicability to the CDNs. And then we have actually a subgroup within open caching called Edge Storage, and I'll talk about their project in a little bit. But the idea there is, how do you extend the caching experience to the home or to the device, right? How does it become part of the larger delivery network? Okay, so talking about this first document, this best practices for reducing live stream latency, you can kind of see on the left, these are the companies that have been actively involved in the drafting of this document. But the objective for this document is really to figure out how do you improve latency? Where within the streaming workflow does latency occur, and what might be the best practices for reducing latency in those areas? And obviously, not all networks are created equal, and they're definitely not all the same. And so these recommendations are going to be tuned and tweaked over time. As a matter of fact, this document is moving into a project in a lab. So Liberty Global has basically built a lab for testing out things like this, and the Streaming Video Alliance is going to use that lab to put some of these best practices and these recommendations into actual networking conditions to see if they actually do work, and what might need to be tailored and tweaked, to that best practice. Right now, the status of the document is that it's in the 2nd stage of member ratification. So all of our documents go through member ratification. They go through a comment period where every member can comment on it. Once a document moves past that, it goes to the board. So the board kind of goes through that same process. And then finally, it goes back for a 3rd time to the members for a final vote. Once the document passes that, it becomes published. It goes onto our website, and it's available for anybody to download for free. So we expect that this will be available probably in Q4 of this year. It'll go through that board ratification in October and then back to the members in November. We usually give them about a 30-day window for ratification. So hopefully we'll be announcing this sometime later this year. We've got another kind of interesting document that's coming out of networking and transport, and it's not necessarily about just the CDN, but it does touch on CDN technologies. And it's really sort of this concept of the video edge and how 5G enables some of that. And then how do things like CDNs connect to that, right? Where is all, again, that interoperability? It's a little bit smaller of a document, but it deals a lot with these technologies and what are the challenges and how do you tackle those challenges and what needs to happen. What role, again, does the edge play in video, and what can it play in video when there's a larger amount of bandwidth to the edge? So this document is currently being drafted, and we expect availability probably sometime in Q2 of 2021. So again, these are the kinds of things that we are actively producing in our working groups. Okay, so now the biggie, right? Now, the Streaming Video Alliance is really known for open caching. This is one of the first working groups that was spun up when the organization was started about 5.5 years ago. So I kind of want to just go over a little bit what open caching is and how it plays in with the CDNs and relates to CDN technologies. So first and foremost, what is open caching? Well, I mean, in general, it's really a network of interconnected caches, right? And it's these caches can communicate to each other via APIs. So that is ultimately what the open caching network is. And there's a management component there as well that would allow somebody to manage multiple open caching compliant caches, from a single point of management. But really, this is all about connecting the caches together so that the caches are aware of what's happening in other caches. Open caching network is really about APIs. So that's how this is facilitated, right? So unlike traditional caches within their own delivery networks, these caches are open, right? They're able to be connected to programmatically via APIs, and that allows these caches, again, to sort of aggregate all that data up into that management plane. Open caching is also about reference code. So we launched an initiative last year, an open source initiative called Streaming Video Alliance Labs. And our Labs initiative was meant to codify specifications developed by our working groups into reference code. So the idea is you don't just get documents and figure out, like, how do you build this? Like, okay, this looks really cool, but I don't, where should I start? And so the idea was we would produce this reference code for these specifications so that people could download the doc, understand the context of the API, and then grab some reference code, whether it's in Python or JavaScript or some other scripting language, and be able to then implement that within some sort of system. And then last, open caching is really about a collaborative approach. So as you'll see in a second, when we talk about who's involved with this initiative and who's been contributing, you'll see that it has strong input from the entire ecosystem. Again, back to sort of who the alliance is. It's got network operator input and service provider input and content rights holders input and technology vendor input. So it's really a collaborative effort to sort of bring open caching into the open. And again, the whole point of open caching is really to enable network operators specifically to have caches in their system and in their networks, which are open and available to rights holders to connect to other caches and other networks and have one big interconnected delivery pool of content. So basically, this diagram is really a high-level overview of what the open caching network is. So, just to explain briefly, and so I'm not going to really dive into this, you can see on the left and the right sort of what a content provider network might look like and what a network operator network might look like. And then above that is the CDN sort of connecting the two together and everything going down to, to that user access and that user device. But really, you can see that red line in the middle between the SVA open caching cache and the network operator open caching cache. They now are connected and they communicate to each other. And so that allows a content provider, for example, to see across all of the caches that are in all of their delivery networks to be able to manage them holistically. So imagine being able to purge them all more easily, or imagine being able to understand what the capacity is across all of the networks, for a specific piece of content or for all of their content. So this kind of describes, again, really high level, what the point of open caching is. It's to enable that network operator and that content provider and that CDN to connect all of these caches together programmatically and allow that content rights holder to be able to manage them much more easily. So, like I said, who's involved? You can see here from this list, these are a lot of our member companies that are participating in the open caching working group. So you can see that there's a really broad brush stroke, and some of these are more focused on the subgroup, which is edge storage. So like Western Digital, for example, and Kioxia, those are really focused in on edge storage. But a lot of these other folks are, you can see network operators like Orange, Telecom Malaysia, Comcast, Verizon, Lumen, all these folks, are operating networks and are thinking about, sort of how do I get caches into my network to improve my delivery at the edge, so I'm not backhauling so much content, but how do I then connect them to all of these other delivery networks so that, again, it's just information and data is being shared amongst all of the caches so that the content provider can do a better job and easier job of managing delivery. So again, lots of participation from the entire ecosystem of streaming video. So in terms of published documents, the open caching has a lot of published documents. They have actually 7 at this time. So there's 4 of them right here. You start out with the functional solution requirements, kind of describes what open caching is meant to do. You've got logging, you've got request routing service functional specifications. We've got interface specifications. All of these documents are available on our website. You can just go to the technical work and you can download whatever you want. Again, you have to be a member to download draft documents, but anything that's published, it can be downloaded by anybody. So we have other documents like content management, right? We have, logging integration. So all of these documents represent different aspects of the cache itself and sort of how they would be programmatically enabled, or what are the functions that need to exist in that feature that should be programmatically enabled. And then the last one here, you'll see it's in a kind of a different cover. We're actually converting all of our documents into a new template. This is token authentication. So this was just published this year. And we actually have three draft documents right now that are undergoing ratification. So performance measurement is just moving into stage 3. So it's going to go to final member vote this month. Then we have request routing, which is an update to the previous request routing specification. It just updates it for manifest rewrite. So it's a new and improved version of that specification. That goes to the board very soon for stage 2. And then capacity interface is still in the drafting stage. So you can see that there's constant work being done by the open caching group to create specifications which further define the programmatic functionality of what an open caching node is. And remember, because this is just code, right, existing caches can become open caching compliant, right? So for example, a CDN cache, which is built on its own reverse proxy and has its own, maybe programmatic interfaces for inside the CDN, can actually enable things like this. I mean, one of the things that we're considering is doing an Nginx plugin for open caching. So basically creating a harness of APIs that somebody can drop into their Nginx instance in order to enable it to be open caching compliant. So again, lots of ways that we're figuring out how to connect open caches to all the other caches that are out there. Now, open caching is also doing a bunch of other projects. One is our capacity footprint API. So again, back to that labs initiative that we launched last year. They've actually produced some reference code for the capacity footprint API. We haven't released it yet. It needs to go through a ratification process as well. But when we do, it'll be available publicly in our Streaming Video Alliance GitHub. And anybody can just basically go and fork it and continue to work on it. So that's coming out. And then the group has really started to look at, as they're developing this capacity API specification, how do we codify this right now? And so there's work being done on that API in addition to the document itself. And then lastly, we're actually just getting ready to build out an open caching sister site for the Streaming Video Alliance. So it'll be something like opencaching.streamingvideoalliance.org, and it will provide a really in-depth look at open caching. So you'll see that architecture diagram. It'll be connected to the specification. So everything will kind of be linked together, and you'll get a clearer picture and understanding of what's trying to be accomplished, what state of build is it in, and when is the rest of the stuff coming. In addition to that, we'll probably feature some case studies as well. So we have had some commercial implementations, and actually Dan Newman from Viasat, he may talk about that a little bit during the panel that's going to follow this presentation. But that website will feature that information as well. So again, look for that. Probably, hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have launched that, allowing you to get more information on open caching. Now, of course, we're also collaborating with other organizations. So this is really cool. We've been working with IETF and the CDNI initiative there in order to make sure that open caching is represented within that project of the IETF. And so we just had an RFC made public regarding request routing extensions. So we're putting the request routing extensions specific to open caches into CDNI. So anybody building caches or building a CDN based on CDNI specifications will be or can be open caching compliant. So again, back to that whole, create a network of organizations all trying to do, working towards the same goal. And then really cool thing, again, like what I mentioned before, is that open caching has a subgroup called Edge Storage. It's been around for a little while, and they've kind of danced around some projects, but this is the first one that has really gained some traction and is substantial. And that's this concept of a home gateway open caching node functional spec. So that's extending the idea of an open caching node down to the home gateway. So maybe it's an attached storage device, maybe it's storage right on the modem router, however it gets implemented, the idea is that we would be able to have cache storage locally within the home network and have that cache be manageable by the content provider, again, as a larger open caching network implementation. So this is just getting off the ground right now. And again, if you've got questions about it, Dan Newman from Viasat is definitely the guy to talk about in the panel next. And so, highly invite you to ask him some questions about it. I know it's still very nascent right now, but it is picking up some steam. All right, sort of what's on the CDN horizon for us? What is the SVA looking at? So just, I guess, kind of think about it in 3 buckets. One are protocols, right? So how are these going to shape CDN delivery, right? Things like QUIC, right? Both Google QUIC and IETF QUIC, and the merger of those 2 things at some point. Speedy, HTTP3, WebRTC. How do these impact delivery? What are the best practices for implementation? And are there other specifications that need to be developed? So that's things that our groups are looking at. Formats, right? So is there a master format, right? Will there be a master format? Will it be CMAF? Will it be Dash? What will it be? How will that influence and impact the streaming video workflow, which of course impacts the CDN, right? In terms of storage, in terms of caching, things like that. So obviously CMAF, low latency CMAF, has a direct impact on the CDN cache, right? It needs to be optimized for that. So things like that, again, our groups are looking at trying to understand what that means for streaming. We do have a document being worked on right now, which is a CMAF document, really just kind of an explanation of the technologies, and it really just kind of puts our emphasis behind it, right? That the SVA is in support of CMAF, but that document will probably come out next year as well. And then lastly, this idea of latency, right? So as I mentioned before, we just published or in the process of ratifying this best practices for reducing live stream latency doc. We want to turn that into something more tangible, right? So the group is taking that to the lab, right? They're taking that to that Liberty Global environment where they'll be able to test out some of the recommendations, show them, right? So we'll do some documentation on before and after, and then be able to go back and update that document reflective of actual network testing to show where true optimization should happen. With that said, that's what I've got for you. So that's pretty good timing. We've got Dom, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I think would be a great time now to open it up for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much, JT. That was a fantastic presentation, very succinct and very informative. So we've actually got a question in from now from Intel. So it's a great question, actually. What's it taking for open caching to take off and become more mainstream? Do we need more pull from the OTT side or from the operator side?
Yeah, I mean, it's really driven by the operators, right? And the operators are on board. So Telefonica, for example, is very bullish on open caching. They've actually been pushing GSMA to include that more in, they've basically done presentations at GSMA to talk to the other mobile operators, say like, hey, listen, we're moving this direction. You should too, especially if you're peering with us. And then we've got like Orange. Orange just joined earlier this year. They're very interested in open caching and how do they implement it. Verizon is already doing some implementation. You've got like Viasat made an announcement with Thibeault last year about implementation of open caching for delivery of Thibeault content in airplanes. And so we're starting to see it's starting to pick up. It's just going to take more operators pushing for it and more content providers saying like, yes, we want to only deliver with caches that are open compliant, open caching compliant. So it's moving in that direction. It's just going to take a little time.